When the silence settled, the balance of power was already broken. Marcus Webb sat alone on the edge of his sister's living room couch in Charlotte, North Carolina, his hands folded loosely, as if he were waiting for instructions that would never come. The house was quiet in the way that followed something loud and irreversible, not peaceful, just empty. The television was on, volume low, the blue glow washing across the walls. No one was really watching it. The same clip played again and again on every local channel. A black man in handcuffs, calm posture, straight spine, eyes steady as he looked directly into the camera lens, not pleading, not angry, but holding something far heavier, a restrained fury, a certainty that could not be shaken. Marcus recognized that face immediately. The city did not yet know his name, but it was already speaking about him as if it did. On the floor near the coffee table, Deshaun Webb sat cross-legged, still in his baseball pants, dirt stains dried, into the knees. He held his glove against his chest with both arms, fingers clenched so tightly the leather creaked softly when he moved. 13 years old and unusually quiet. No questions, no complaints, just staring at the screen, then away from it, then back again. Marcus watched his nephew more than he watched the television. That worried him more than the footage ever could. Shanice had gone into the kitchen earlier and never came back out. He could hear cabinets opening and closing for no reason, footsteps pacing, the quiet rhythm of someone trying not to fall apart in front of the people she loved. The man on the screen was being described in careful language. An incident, a misunderstanding, a developing situation. The anchors spoke softly, as if lowering their voices might soften what had already happened. They mentioned the park. They mentioned witnesses. They mentioned video spreading fast. They did not mention how quickly power can change hands when the truth walks into the room uninvited. Marcus leaned back slightly and exhaled through his nose. His chest felt tight, not from panic, but from something colder, the kind of fear that arrives too late to be useful, the kind that tells you the door has already closed behind you. He thought about the look on the man's face in the video, how still he looked, how controlled, how many people would mistake that for guilt. Deshaun finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's him, isn't it?" Marcus did not answer right away. On the screen, the footage froze on that same moment. The camera angle was close, too close. The man's eyes filled the frame, not scared, not broken, just awake. Marcus nodded once. Deshaun swallowed. "Everyone at school is going to see this." Marcus felt the weight of that sentence settle into the room. "Yes," he said. "They are." The boy pressed the glove harder into his chest. "They're saying he did something." Marcus looked at the television now, at the headlines sliding across the bottom, at the careful words chosen to avoid blame. "They always do," Marcus said quietly. Outside, a car passed by. Somewhere down the street, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. Life in the city continued, indifferent to the moment unfolding inside this small living room. Marcus knew something had shifted, not just for the man on the screen, not just for his family, but for people who had believed the rules worked the same way for everyone. The silence in the room was no longer waiting. It was settling in. Marcus lowered his gaze and thought, without speaking, the sentence that had already become true. The truth did not raise its voice. It just stepped forward. If you follow the rules, the system will protect you. Marcus Webb had built his life on order. 15 years with the U.S. Marshal Service had trained him to believe in structure the way some men believe in faith. Show up on time, do the job right, document everything, speak clearly, never escalate. The system, flawed as it might be, worked best when you respected its rules. On weekdays, Marcus wore a suit and tie to the federal courthouse downtown. He secured courtrooms, escorted judges, managed defendants who swung between arrogance and desperation. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man supervisors trusted without needing to check twice. No complaints, no drama, no stories that followed him home. That was how he liked it. His weekends were even quieter. No bars, no politics, no noise. Saturday mornings belonged to grocery runs and yard work. Saturday afternoons belonged to Riverside Community Park, where metal bleachers baked under the Carolina sun and the air smelled like cut grass and cheap concession stand hot dogs. Deshaun's baseball games were the only appointments Marcus refused to miss. He arrived early every time, folding himself onto the same section of bleachers, nodding politely at other parents. He cheered when it was appropriate, clapped when effort deserved it, stayed quiet when coaches barked instructions that meant more to them than to the kids. Marcus knew how to exist without attracting attention. It was a skill he had learned long before the badge. He believed in being seen as reasonable. At the park, Marcus was just another uncle. Jeans, navy polo, sunglasses resting on his head. A man who blended into the background while keeping one eye on the field and the other on his nephew. When Deshaun glanced toward the stands, Marcus always met his eyes and gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just presence. That mattered. He trusted the environment because he trusted the rules that governed it. Public park, public space, daylight, families everywhere, nothing hidden, nothing to fear. If you stayed calm, nothing bad happened. That belief had carried him through traffic stops, tense arrests, heated courtrooms. It had kept him alive in situations where other men panicked and paid for it. Calm was control. Calm was protection. During the third inning, an older black man sitting 2 rows behind him leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You come out here every week?" the man asked. "Just about," Marcus replied, smiling. The man chuckled. "That boy's got a strong arm. Reminds me of my grandson." They watched the game for a moment in companionable silence. Then the man spoke again, his voice lighter than his words. "Around here, calm doesn't always save you." Marcus turned slightly surprised. The man wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes were fixed on the field. Marcus smiled, polite and unconcerned. "I hear you." The man nodded once as if that was all he expected. Marcus let the comment drift away. He had heard versions of it before, warnings disguised as jokes. Fear passed down like inherited stories. He respected them, but he didn't live by them. He had chosen a different logic, a cleaner one. He believed that if you followed the law would recognize you, that if you spoke clearly, people would listen, that if you kept your hands visible, your movements slow, your tone measured, the system would respond in kind. What Marcus never admitted out loud, not even to himself, was what he actually feared. It was not dying. It was being misunderstood. It was the moment when someone decided who he was without asking, when a glance turned into a conclusion, when years of discipline collapsed under a single assumption. He feared being reduced to suspicion in the span of a heartbeat. As the sun dipped lower, warming the metal beneath him, Marcus leaned back and watched Deshaun sprint toward first base, laughing as dust kicked up behind him. The crowd clapped. A whistle blew. Somewhere nearby, someone spilled a drink and cursed softly. Everything felt ordinary, safe, predictable. Marcus sat still on the bleachers, confident in the quiet rules he had lived by for decades. At least, he believed he was safe. That afternoon, he chose stillness over instinct. The first thing Marcus noticed was the shadow. It slid across the concrete in front of him, cutting through the warm afternoon light that had been resting on his shoes. A shape where there had not been one a moment before. He looked up slowly, the way he had trained himself to do in situations that carried weight. 2 uniformed officers stood at the edge of the bleachers. One of them was older, mid-40s maybe. Broad shoulders, close cropped hair, a jaw that stayed clenched even when he wasn't speaking. His nameplate read, Ryan Brennan, the kind of officer who took up space without asking permission. The other was younger, late 20s, leaner build, hands never fully still. Kyle Hayes. His eyes flicked around the park, to the field, the parents, the kids, like he was trying to read a room he didn't quite understand. Brennan spoke first. "Sir, can you stand up for me?" It wasn't a question. Marcus felt the instinct immediately. The quiet, tightening in his chest. The voice that said, "Look around, count exits, assess tone." But he didn't move yet. He kept his hands resting on his knees, fingers visible, posture relaxed. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked. Brennan didn't answer the question. He stepped closer. "Let's see some ID." The game behind them continued for a moment. A coach shouted encouragement. A bat cracked against a ball. Then the sound began to fade as people noticed what was happening. Marcus nodded once. Okay, he said, calm, neutral. I'm going to reach into my back pocket. He said it for them. He said it for anyone listening. He said it for himself. Every movement matters. He rose slowly, deliberately, the metal bleacher warm against the backs of his legs. He kept his shoulders loose, his breathing steady. He had been in tighter situations than this. Darker alleys, closed rooms. This was a public park in the middle of the afternoon. Calm doesn't always save you. The thought surfaced uninvited, but he pushed it down. As he reached for his wallet, Brennan's voice cut in sharper. Slow it down. Marcus froze mid-motion. His hand hovered inches from his pocket. I am, he said. I'm moving slowly. Hayes shifted his weight. He stood closer now, just off to Marcus's side. A flanking position Marcus knew well. Training taught you how to surround. Life taught you how to recognize it. Marcus kept his eyes forward, not challenging, not submissive, neutral. The unspoken rules ran through his mind faster than his heartbeat. Move wrong, and it escalates. Sound defensive, and it escalates. Sound emotional, and it escalates. So he did the opposite. He stayed still. Brennan stepped in and took the wallet from Marcus's hand himself. He flipped it open with practice speed, eyes scanning, dismissive at first, then slower. Marcus watched the change register on his face. Not surprise, not relief, suspicion. You mind telling me why you're here? Brennan asked. Marcus answered truthfully. Watching my nephew play baseball. Hayes glanced toward the field, toward Deshaun, standing near second base, hands on his hips, eyes drawn to the bleachers. And you come out here often? Hayes asked. Every weekend, Marcus said. Brennan closed the wallet and held it instead of handing it back. You live around here? Yes. You always carry this much ID on you. Marcus felt it then. The shift. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't procedure. This was something else. I work in law enforcement, Marcus said carefully. He hadn't planned to say it yet, but the questions were circling tighter now. My credentials are in there. Brennan's mouth curled slightly. Not a smile. Oh yeah? Yes, Marcus replied. His voice remained even, measured. I'm a federal officer. Hayes stiffened. Brennan let out a short laugh. Sure you are, Brennan said. And I'm supposed to believe that. Marcus felt the familiar pressure rise. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. The understanding that he had reached the moment where the rules no longer applied the way he believed they did. He chose his words carefully. I'm a federal court security officer with the U.S. Marshal Service, he said. You can verify me. My badge and federal ID are right there. He expected the moment to end there. He expected the tone to change. An apology, an embarrassed pause, a step back. Instead, Brennan stepped closer. You know, impersonating a federal officer is a serious crime, he said. Marcus met his eyes now, just briefly. I'm not impersonating anyone, Marcus said. You can call it in. It will take less than a minute. Hayes swallowed. He looked uncertain. For a split second, Marcus thought he saw doubt flicker there, the possibility of correction. Then Brennan spoke again. Turn around. The words landed heavier than they should have. Marcus did not argue. He did not ask why. He did not protest. He turned slowly, keeping his hands visible, his movements deliberate. The sound of the game had stopped completely now. He could feel eyes on his back, parents, kids, phones coming out. From somewhere behind him, he heard Deshaun's voice. Uncle Marcus. The sound hit him harder than anything else. I'm okay, Marcus said quickly. Too quickly, he softened his tone. Stay with your coach. He felt the shift in himself then, the moment where instinct screamed at him to say more, to explain, to protect the boy from what he was seeing. But instinct had never kept him safe. Stillness had. As Brennan's grip tightened on his arm, Marcus understood something with sudden clarity. They didn't want the truth. They wanted control. And by offering the truth, he had challenged the only thing they were trying to preserve. Marcus stayed silent. He stayed steady. He stayed exactly where they told him to be. And in doing so, he crossed a line he never intended to cross. Not with his body. With his belief. He realized that afternoon that when power feels questioned, truth does not calm it. It threatens it. That afternoon, he chose stillness over instinct. The space around Marcus seemed to shrink, not physically, but emotionally, as if the air itself had learned to hold its breath. The laughter from the field had vanished. No bats cracking, no coaches shouting. Only the quiet scrape of shoes on concrete and the soft mechanical sounds of radios clipped to uniforms. Marcus focused on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow enough to be unremarkable. This was the part no one taught you. Not in academies, not in handbooks. The moment when compliance stopped being enough, but resistance would be fatal. The narrow strip of space where your body wanted to react and your mind had to override it. Brennan's voice came again, closer now, lower. "You nervous about something?" Marcus shook. His head once. Minimal movement. Controlled. "No, sir." Hayes shifted behind him. Marcus could hear the hesitation in his footsteps, the uneven rhythm of someone trying to follow orders without fully understanding them. "You sure you don't want to explain why a federal officer is just sitting out here?" Hayes asked. Marcus chose his words carefully. Each one felt heavier than the last. "I already did," he said. "I'm off duty. I'm here with my family." Brennan scoffed. "Funny thing about stories," he said. "Everyone's got one." Marcus closed his eyes for half a second, not in defiance, in restraint. He could feel the moment slipping, the chance for this to end cleanly dissolving right in front of him. He had done everything right, hands visible, voice calm, truth offered freely. And still, something in Brennan's posture told him the decision had already been made. Hayes spoke again, more to Brennan than to Marcus. "We should probably run him just to be safe." Marcus heard the word safe and almost laughed. "Yes," Marcus said quickly, seizing the opening. "Please, run it. Call it in. My supervisor can confirm everything." Brennan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back just enough to look Marcus up and down, slow and deliberate, as if weighing something invisible. "You know what I think," Brennan said. "I think you're trying to sound important, so we back off." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. This was the edge. The exact place where saying the wrong thing could turn stillness into defiance. "I'm not asking you to back off," Marcus said quietly. "I'm asking you to verify." Brennan's jaw tightened. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw movement. Shanice, his sister, had reached the edge of the crowd. Her purse hung loose at her side, forgotten. Her face was pale, eyes wide, searching for him. "What's going on?" she called out. "That's my brother." Hayes lifted a hand toward her instinctively. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "I'm not stepping back," Shanice said. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "He hasn't done anything." Marcus wanted to turn, wanted to tell her to stop, wanted to pull her out of the line of fire that didn't look like fire until it was too late. He stayed still. Brennan's voice cut through the moment. "Ma'am, do not interfere." "I'm not interfering," she shot back. "I'm asking why you're treating him like this." Marcus felt the pressure build behind his eyes. Not tears. Something harder. The weight of knowing that no explanation he gave would protect the people he loved from what they were witnessing. Somewhere nearby, a phone chimed as it started recording. Another one followed. Brennan noticed. His shoulders stiffened. "Turn around and face forward," he ordered Marcus. Marcus complied. As he did, something shifted inside him. A realization that landed quietly, but firmly. This was no longer about procedure, or safety, or misunderstanding. This was about authority being questioned in public. And authority does not like witnesses. Marcus stood there, hands where they could be seen, body perfectly still, while the world around him changed its angle. Parents whispered, kids stared, cameras rose. In that moment, Marcus understood the truth with painful clarity. By naming himself, by offering the truth calmly and without fear, he had challenged the unspoken hierarchy that demanded silence first and explanations later. Power, when confronted, does not pause to reflect. It reacts. And truth, when it steps forward without permission, stops being a solution. It becomes a threat. Marcus did not move. He did not argue. He did not resist. But something irreversible had already happened. He had learned that afternoon that stillness could keep you alive, but it could not protect you from what power does when it feels exposed. Whispers spread before facts. The walk across the park felt longer than it should have. Marcus didn't fight it. He didn't drag his feet or lean away. He let his body move where it was directed because every step was being watched, because stillness had kept him from becoming a headline for something worse. Children stood frozen near the baseline, gloves hanging loose at their sides. A few of them stared openly. Others turned away, instinctively sensing this was not something they were supposed to see, but unable to stop themselves. Parents rose from the bleachers in small waves, some with hands over their mouths, some whispering questions to no one in particular, some already holding their phones out, framing the moment without fully understanding it. Marcus felt their eyes before he saw their faces. He caught sight of Deshaun just as they passed the edge of the field. The boy stood near the dugout, helmet tilted crooked on his head, confusion written across his face. His mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. He took a step forward and stopped when a coach gently put a hand on his shoulder. That single gesture cut deeper than any words. Marcus kept his head level. He wanted Deshaun to see calm. He wanted him to remember that. Behind them, voices rose and fell. What happened? Did he do something? I heard they asked for his ID. Someone said his name wrong. Someone else repeated it anyway. Whispers moved faster than truth ever could. Shanice broke through the edge of the crowd, her hospital badge still clipped to her scrubs. She had come straight from work, hair pulled back tight, face flushed from running. Her eyes locked onto Marcus immediately. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why are you taking him?" Brennan didn't slow. "Ma'am, you need to step back." "I'm his sister," Shanice said. Her voice shook with anger now. "He hasn't done anything." Hayes glanced at Brennan, uncertain. For a brief moment, Marcus thought he might speak up, that he might say something human. Instead, he stayed silent. Shanice reached out instinctively, as if she could touch Marcus and pull him back into the world she understood. Brennan raised an arm, blocking her without looking at her. "Step back," he repeated. Louder this time, Marcus finally spoke, just once. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm fine." Shanice looked at him like he had betrayed her. "You are not fine," she said. "This is not okay." She was right. They both knew it, but knowing didn't change anything. A man near the bleachers lifted his phone higher. "You can't do this," the man said. He didn't do anything. Brennan turned his head just enough to acknowledge the voice. "Sir, stay where you are." Another phone came up, then another. The moment fractured into pieces, images captured from different angles, different narratives forming in real time. Marcus understood that what was happening now would outlive the moment itself. That long after he was gone from this place, the footage would remain, replayed, paused, interpreted. He wondered which version of him people would decide to believe. At the edge of the parking lot, the patrol car waited, its back door open, empty. The sight of it made something in Marcus's chest tighten. Not fear, recognition. He had put people into cars like that before. He knew what it meant. Behind him, Shanice's voice broke. "This is wrong," she said, louder now. "Everyone can see that." No one answered her. That was the first real consequence. Not the hands guiding him forward, not the public spectacle, but the realization that when something unjust happens in broad daylight, the world often responds with silence disguised as caution. The car door closed behind him, sealing out the noise, the shouts, the questions, the sound of a boy calling his uncle's name. Inside the car, the air was stale. Marcus stared at the back of the front seat and focused on his breathing. Outside, the crowd lingered. They would talk about this tonight. At dinner tables, in text messages, in group chats labeled parents and neighbors. By morning, the story would have grown teeth. Marcus knew that rumors would move faster than facts, that by the time anyone bothered to ask what really happened, most people would already think they knew. As the car pulled away, he caught one last glimpse of the park in the side mirror. Deshaun stood alone now, gloves still clutched to his chest, staring at the empty space where Marcus had been moments earlier. That image stayed with him. The arrest itself hurt, but Marcus was already beginning to understand that the silence afterward would hurt far more. Whispers spread before facts. The patrol car did not rush. It rolled out of Riverside Community Park at a careful, deliberate pace, slow enough for people to keep filming, slow enough for the moment to stretch and settle into memory. Marcus sat upright in the back seat, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He refused to slouch, refused to shrink. If this was going to be seen, it would be seen clearly. At the first stoplight, the car paused. A woman in the next lane looked over, recognized the handcuffs, and quickly looked away. Another driver stared openly, curiosity outweighing discomfort. Someone across the intersection raised a phone and snapped a photo through the windshield. Marcus wondered how many of those images would circulate by nightfall. Inside the car, no one spoke. That silence was different from the one at the park. This one felt intentional, tactical, as if saying nothing could erase the questions forming on both sides of the glass. At the park, Shanice remained frozen where she had been told to stop. Long after the car disappeared, she stood there, gripping her purse with white knuckles, her heart racing, her thoughts colliding into one overwhelming truth. She had just watched her brother be taken without explanation. Parents approached her carefully, voices low, unsure of what they were allowed to say. "I'm so sorry," one woman whispered. Another asked, "Do you know what happened?" Shanice shook her head. "No," she said. And that's the problem. She turned toward the field, searching for her son. Deshaun sat on the bench now, helmet off, staring down at the dirt between his cleats. The game had resumed, but he wasn't watching it. He wasn't part of it anymore. "Desh," she called softly. He didn't respond. When she reached him, she knelt down and took his face gently in her hands. His eyes were glassy, distant. "Hey," she said. "Look at me." He did slowly. "Why did they take Uncle Marcus?" he asked. Shanice opened her mouth and realized she didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt him. "I don't know yet," she said, "but we're going to find out." Deshaun glanced toward the parking lot, then back at his glove. He pulled it off and set it on the bench beside him. "I don't want to play anymore," he said. The words were quiet, but final. Across the park, the whispers continued. Someone said Marcus must have argued with the police. Someone else said he matched a description. A third person said they heard he refused to cooperate. None of them had spoken to him. None of them had asked Shanice. None of them had seen what actually mattered. By the time the sun dipped lower, the story had already begun to mutate. At home that evening, Shanice paced the living room while the television replayed the footage on loop. The same angle, the same frozen frame of Marcus being led away. Each replay stripped a little more context and added a little more speculation. Deshaun sat on the floor again, glove in his lap, untouched. "I didn't know cops could do that," he said suddenly. Shanice stopped pacing. "Do what, baby?" "Just take someone," he said. Even when they didn't do anything. She knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "They're not supposed to," she said. "But they did," Deshaun replied. The simplicity of the statement crushed her. At the station, Marcus was processed quietly. No explanations offered, no urgency to clarify. Time stretched, paperwork shuffled, doors opened and closed without ceremony. He answered questions when asked. He corrected false statements when they appeared. He stayed calm, even when it felt pointless. Hours later, when the noise finally faded and he was left alone with his thoughts, Marcus felt the full weight of what had happened settle into him. Not the humiliation, not the fear, but the understanding that by morning, people would already have chosen what they believed, that his name would be passed around without his voice attached to it. That silence would fill the gaps where truth should have been. Lying awake that night, Marcus stared at the ceiling and replayed the afternoon in his mind. Every word, every pause, every decision to remain still. The arrest itself had been loud. But what came after, the waiting, the whispers, the absence of accountability, that was the part that lingered. And Marcus realized, with a clarity that hurt more than anger ever could, the arrest didn't hurt the most. The silence afterward did. Every door he trusted began to close. Time moved differently inside the holding room. There were no clocks on the walls Marcus could see, just pale paint scuffed by years of waiting bodies and a bench bolted to the floor. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and kept ringing until it stopped on its own. No one told Marcus how long he would be there. No one explained what they were waiting for. He had given his name, his badge number, his assignment. He had repeated it all more than once, calmly, clearly, exactly the way he had been trained. Each time, the response was the same. "We're checking." Minutes stretched into hours. A uniformed officer walked past the doorway and glanced in, curiosity flickering across his face before he looked away. Another passed without looking at all. Paperwork moved slower than it ever had when Marcus was the one escorting someone else. He sat upright, hands resting on his thighs, posture unchanged. Stillness had become a habit now, less a strategy than a necessity. At some point, a man in a pressed shirt stepped in, glanced at a file, and frowned. "There's a flag on your name," he said. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What kind of flag?" "Temporary," the man replied. "Procedural?" "Procedural." The word hung in the air, empty of meaning but heavy with consequence. "Has my identity been verified?" Marcus asked. The man hesitated. "Not yet." "Why not?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We're waiting for confirmation." From whom? Marcus wanted to ask. From what threshold of comfort? From what permission? But he didn't press. He had learned that questions sometimes worked. Against you. Later, when his phone was finally returned, it vibrated immediately in his hand. Missed calls, messages stacking on top of one another. Shanice, a number he didn't recognize. A colleague from the courthouse who hadn't left a voicemail. He scrolled without opening anything. The weight of being watched pressed in on him, even here. By the time he was released, night had settled over the city. No apology, no explanation. Just a quiet dismissal that felt less like freedom and more like postponement. At home, the television told a story he barely recognized. The footage from the park played beside headlines framed as questions. Was the arrest justified? What aren't we seeing? Authorities say investigation is ongoing. Marcus watched an anchor tilt her head sympathetically as she spoke about police having to make difficult decisions in uncertain situations. Another panelist suggested there might have been more to the interaction than the video showed. Marcus turned the volume down. In the kitchen, Shanice leaned against the counter, arms crossed tight across her chest. "They're acting like this is your fault," she said. "Like you did something wrong by existing." Marcus didn't answer. He sat at the table, staring at the grain in the wood, tracing patterns with his eyes. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a coworker. "You okay?" He typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed again. "I'm fine." The lie came easily. The next morning, the silence grew louder. No calls from supervisors, no messages of support. Just a brief email notifying him that his status was under review, pending clarification of events. Neutral language, careful phrasing, temporary, procedural. At the grocery store, a woman recognized him from the video and stared openly. A man near the checkout whispered to his wife. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest again. Not fear, awareness. At home, Deshawn stayed in his room longer than usual. His glove lay untouched by the door. That night, lying awake, Marcus stared at the ceiling and finally allowed the question to form. If this can happen to me, with a badge and 15 years of service, what happens to the people without one? The thought settled into him, heavy and undeniable. This was no longer about a misunderstanding, no longer about clearing his name. The doors he had trusted were closing quietly, one by one. And Marcus understood, with growing clarity, that what he was facing was bigger than himself. Every door he trusted began to close. By the third day, Marcus stopped checking his phone for answers. The notifications kept coming anyway. News alerts, opinion pieces, comment sections that turned his life into a debate. Strangers argued about his tone, his posture, his past, things they had invented because invention was easier than uncertainty. One headline read, "Questions remain after park arrest." Another asked, "Was the officer's caution reasonable?" Reasonable, the word felt sharp in his mouth. At the courthouse, his access badge no longer opened the side entrance. Security waved him toward the public line with apologetic looks that never quite met his eyes. A clerk he had worked alongside for years gave a tight smile and said nothing. A judge he had escorted dozens of times nodded once and kept walking. Marcus felt himself becoming invisible in places where he used to belong. At home, Shanice fielded calls she did not ask for. Reporters, community members, distant relatives who had opinions but no understanding. She tried to protect Deshawn from the noise, but it seeped in anyway. A classmate asked him if his uncle was in jail. Another asked if he had done something bad. Deshawn stopped wearing his team jersey to school. One evening, Marcus found him sitting on the edge of his bed, scrolling through videos on his phone. Clips from the park, slow-motion breakdowns, people pointing arrows at Marcus's hands, his shoulders, his face. "Turn that off," Marcus said gently. Deshawn hesitated. "They keep saying you should have just done what they asked." Marcus sat beside him. The mattress dipped under his weight. I did, Marcus said. Every time. Deshawn frowned. Then why didn't it work? Marcus didn't have an answer that wouldn't break something. Outside their apartment, a neighbor avoided eye contact. Another offered a quiet nod that felt more like pity than support. The world had shifted just enough to make everything unfamiliar. Late that night, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with the lights off. His badge lay in front of him, catching a sliver of moonlight. He turned it over slowly, tracing the edges with his thumb. For years, that badge had meant something clear: authority, responsibility, protection, a promise that if he followed the rules, the system would recognize him as part of itself. Now, it felt like a question mark. He thought about the holding room, the delays, the way no one hurried to verify what he had offered freely. He thought about the headlines, the silence from people who knew better, the careful distance everyone was keeping. He thought about the men and women he had escorted through those same halls. People without lawyers on speed dial, without supervisors who might eventually answer, without a public that cared enough to ask questions. If this could happen to him, he knew exactly what happened to them. Marcus closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. The anger was there, but it wasn't wild. It was focused, sharpened by clarity. This was not a misunderstanding to be corrected. It was a pattern to be confronted. He picked up his phone and opened a message he had been avoiding, a number he recognized from years of quiet cooperation between agencies. He didn't type much. "We need to talk. This isn't just about me." He set the phone down and looked at his badge one last time before slipping it back into his wallet. For the first time since the park, Marcus allowed himself to name what this had become. Not an incident, not a mistake, a line. And once you see it, you cannot pretend it belongs only to you. Marcus understood then that this was no longer personal. The truth didn't shock the system, it exposed it. The first real change did not arrive with an apology. It arrived with recognition. Marcus had been sitting in the same interview room for what felt like another borrowed hour when the door opened and a man stepped in who did not look at him like a problem that needed managing. The man paused, eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. "Marcus Webb," he said. Marcus looked up. "Yes, sir." The man exhaled and shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "Damn," he said quietly, "I thought that was you." Sergeant Raymond Mitchell pulled a chair back and sat down without asking permission. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, the posture of someone who had worn a uniform long enough to stop performing authority and start carrying it. "I'm Raymond Mitchell," he said. "Internal Affairs." Marcus studied him for a second, then it clicked. "We worked courthouse detail together," Marcus said. "Federal Annex. About 6 years ago." Mitchell nodded. "You kept Judge Harmon alive during that sentencing mess. And you stopped a deputy from ruining his career by lying in a report," Marcus replied. Mitchell gave a tired smile. "Yeah, that sounds about right." The room shifted, not in temperature, in weight. Mitchell reached into his folder and slid a photograph across the table, a still image pulled from a body camera. Marcus sitting on the bleachers, hands visible, posture relaxed, timestamp running uninterrupted. "No suspicious activity," Mitchell said. 14 minutes before first contact. He slid another image forward, Brennan approaching. No radio call preceding it. No dispatch, no complaint, no description. Mitchell continued. "They self-initiated." Marcus stayed quiet. Mitchell tapped the folder. Witness statements matched the video. Calm, cooperative, no resistance. He paused, then added, "And that's before we get to their history." Marcus's eyes lifted. Mitchell leaned back. "This isn't the first time officers Brennan and Hayes have done this." He opened another file. Complaints, dates, names blacked out but patterns clear. Traffic stops without cause. Questioning without justification. Reports written carefully enough to survive casual review, vague enough to avoid discipline. "All black civilians," Mitchell said. "Every single one." Marcus felt something settle into place inside him. Not relief, not satisfaction, confirmation. "And when they realized who you were," Mitchell continued, "they didn't correct the mistake." He hesitated, choosing his words. "They tried to outrun it." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Mitchell slid one last document across the table. "Oh, preliminary report. Discrepancies highlighted. Statements that did not match video. Timelines that did not align. They started shaping a story, Mitchell said, and the system almost let them. Almost. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. So, this was never about what I did, he said. Mitchell shook his head. No. It was about who they thought they were dealing with. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Marcus broke it. How many times did this happen before someone stopped it? Mitchell didn't answer right away. That's the part I can't shake, he said finally. How much silence it took. The words hit Marcus harder than the arrest ever had, because in that moment he understood something that went beyond his own experience. The damage wasn't the arrest, it was what silence had allowed long before it. Mitchell stood. I'm verifying your identity formally, he said. That part ends today. Marcus nodded. And the rest? Mitchell met his eyes. The rest just started. Hours later, as Marcus walked out into the night air, nothing felt fixed. His name was cleared on paper, his badge restored, but the city had already seen what it needed to see. The truth had not arrived loudly. It had arrived documented, recorded, verified, and that was worse, because truth like that does not disappear, it waits. And once it steps forward, power begins to shift quietly, inevitably, with nowhere left to hide. Power doesn't fall loudly, it collapses quietly. The investigation did not begin with sirens or press conferences, it began with silence. Officer Ryan Brennan stopped showing up for overtime shifts. His name vanished from the patrol rotation board without explanation. Officer Kyle Hayes was reassigned to desk duty, then quietly placed on administrative leave. No announcements, no statements, just absence. In law enforcement, absence speaks louder than accusations. The police union released a short, carefully worded message 2 days later. It expressed concern. It emphasized due process. It avoided names. There was no defense, no outrage, no rallying cry. The union had read the room and stepped back before the floor gave way. Brennan noticed first. He went from being greeted with nods and jokes in the locker room to receiving polite distance. Conversation stopped when he entered. A lieutenant who once slapped him on the shoulder now addressed him formally, eyes never quite meeting his. Authority does not disappear all at once. It erodes. Hayes felt it differently. Younger, less protected. His inbox filled with instructions and no explanations. His phone stopped ringing. Friends stopped asking how he was holding up. When he tried to explain himself, people listened with their arms crossed. The story had already moved on without him. Publicly, nothing dramatic happened. There were no mugshots, no handcuffs. But the footage continued to circulate, paused, analyzed, shared. With captions that stripped away excuses, people did not need a verdict to recognize a pattern. Brennan's face, once associated with command and confidence, became something else entirely. A symbol of excess, of unchecked certainty, of a man who believed his authority would never be questioned. That belief was the first thing he lost. Hayes lost his voice. When reporters reached out, his attorney declined comment. When neighbors asked questions, he avoided eye contact. He began parking farther away from his own building. Fear had changed sides. Marcus watched it all from a distance. He did not celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching two men unravel, no sense of victory in seeing reputations dissolve. He felt tired in a way that sleep did not fix, tired of knowing how easily this could have gone differently. How many people never reached this moment of exposure because they lacked witnesses, footage, or a badge that forced attention. At a community meeting weeks later, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for standing your ground." Marcus nodded politely. "I didn't have a choice." She looked confused. "You could have let it go." Marcus thought about that. Letting it go would have been easier, quieter, safer for everyone except the people who came next. "That's the problem," he said finally. "Too many people have." As the weeks passed, Brennan and Hayes became cautionary tales whispered inside their own department. Examples used without names, mistakes referenced without ownership. Their punishment was not immediate incarceration, it was erasure. They lost the thing they valued most, not freedom, not income, but legitimacy. The unspoken permission to command compliance simply by wearing a uniform. Power had not been taken from them, it had withdrawn. Marcus felt the weight of that realization settle on him. This was not justice completed, it was justice begun. Fragile, conditional, dependent on what came next. One evening, as he sat alone on his porch, the city quiet around him, Marcus understood the truth that no headline would capture. Some victories do not feel like winning. They feel like responsibility. And once you see how power really collapses, you cannot unsee it. You can only decide what you will do with what remains. Some echoes don't fade. They reshape the room. Marcus returned to Riverside Community Park months later on a quiet afternoon. There was no game that day, no crowds, no voices carrying across the field, just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the faint metallic creak of the bleachers as he sat down in the same place he once believed was ordinary. The park looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Marcus understood something he had not understood before. Truth does not arrive to rescue anyone. It does not step in and gently correct the story. It does something far more dangerous. It exposes what people were hoping would stay hidden. The system had not protected him because he followed the rules. It had reacted because the truth became visible, because it was recorded, because it stood in front of witnesses and refused to lower its eyes. Power had not been defeated by outrage or force. It had been weakened by light. Marcus was not better for what happened to him. He was not healed. He did not feel proud. The experience had stripped something away that would never fully return. A certain ease, a certain trust, a belief that doing everything right would be enough. But he was awake now. He spoke at community meetings, not as a hero, but as a witness. He listened more than he talked. When people told their stories, he did not rush to reassure them. He let the weight of their words settle where it belonged. When Deshaun asked questions now, Marcus answered honestly, not with fear, not with bitterness, with clarity. The boy returned to baseball eventually, not because the fear disappeared, but because Marcus refused to let silence be the lesson that remained. The system did not become just overnight. It never does, but it learned something it could not forget. That when truth steps forward without asking permission, authority is forced to reveal itself. And once that happens, power has nowhere left to stand. Marcus rose from the bleachers and walked away from the field, carrying no victory, no satisfaction, only resolve. Some echoes do not fade. They change how every voice that follows is heard.